forever. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit through interviewing, and then as Courtney mentioned, we have a guest speaker who's actually been through the job search group before, but I'll introduce her more formally when we get to that point. But first I want to take some of the mystery out of interviewing. One of the things that I think about when I think about this presentation is it's really important to simplify this process and not to be overwhelmed, and it really comes down to preparation. And I think a lot of times you can Google interviewing and that can be a very overwhelming process. It'll tell you have to know the answer to this question and that question, and I really just want to strip that all down. And again, we're trying to provide resources where you have a one-stop shop to get the latest and the greatest, and not to be overwhelmed by knowing the 100 top questions and how to answer every single one of those, because that makes me nauseous just thinking about it. So, and we don't want you to feel nauseous. We want you to feel confident. So I'm going to take you through some slides, and we will have, again, an activity in the process, and then we'll have our guest speaker who does a lot of interviewing. So again, I'm going to go over to my slide sharing. And I'm going to share that, and then I'm going to click from the beginning. And I'm going to just check with my colleague Courtney and make sure it's on full screen.
You are good to go. And
okay,
I
great.
mention that we do have Q&A working as usual. So if it's not remembered, you can just hop over to link.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we are talking about interviewing. So just to kind of set the stage here, you know, what is the purpose? What are the characteristics of an interview? What's most important to remember? And why are these people interviewing you? What do they want to get out of it? Well, they want to make sure that the qualifications that you indicated in your cover letter and your resume are true, and that you are qualified for the job. They will interview you if they see that really you have the background to start this job day one. So, and as I mentioned earlier, typically I recommend that if you qualify for 75% of what they're looking for, it's worth a shot. And then if they review your materials, and they say, yeah, this person's worth looking at, then they just want to make sure that you're matching those up. A thing that's very important to most employers is to demonstrate your leadership and your initiative. So whether you've done that in the past or you want to showcase that in your next role, these are very important qualities. And the things that I'm sharing with you right now, it comes from a lot of research and interviewing with other recruiters and hiring managers on what they're looking for when they're interviewing people. They want to see if you're motivated, if you're goal-oriented. Now, I know one of the most dreaded questions is, where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years? You know, that can be an overwhelming question, and typically I recommend that people think about not necessarily what the titles are, but where you see yourself. Would you like to be managing people? Would you like to be traveling? Think a little bit more about some of those other skills versus titles, because as we know too, titles change all the time, and so that's not necessarily the most important. But they want to know that you're motivated, that you want to move forward, that you have goals, that you don't want to just stay stagnant, because they know if you're motivated and you have goals, you will try to be successful, you will be looking to add value to the organization, and that's really important. And then fourth, communication is really important, and you'll be communicating those things. Both they've seen some of your written product, and so hopefully there's been no errors in your cover letter and your resume, so they're happy with that writing product, but then they want to see how well you communicate in the verbal form. So can you make complete sentences? Do you have a beginning and a middle and an end to your answers? Are you avoiding any kind of thought fillers? Making sure we don't say like or just, but really being thoughtful about your communication, because you're going to be talking to all different levels within the organization, and they want to make sure that you have the confidence and are articulate enough that that you will do well in this organization. Because as we know, what's most important is fit. 80% of decisions are based on fit. If they see that you meet all the qualifications in your resume and your cover letter, they're feeling good about the communication that they've had in the interview, they're trying to see, is this someone I want to spend 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week with? Are they, and you should be looking for the fit as well. I want you to be thinking, do I like these people? Am I going to be comfortable here? Are the expectations reasonable for me? But they're also going to be looking at you. Is it comfortable to be in your presence? Is it, you know, are they enjoying the time with you? even though the interview feels very awkward and stiff much of the time, you do want to try to make it as relaxed and conversational as possible. And again, I do believe that if you're well prepared, you do have those opportunities to make it comfortable. So they're going to be looking at analyzing all of your skills and experience. And we're going to talk about how important it is to have very specific examples and really trying to avoid speaking in generalities. Speaking in generalities, it just doesn't make you memorable. And the goal is, if they're interviewing several people for this position, how do you stand out from those people? And it really will come to how you tell your stories, how you share your experience, and making sure that you've demonstrated how you've utilized the skills that you've indicated that you've had, whether it's management, design, communication, analysis, research. There's so many different skills for different jobs, but they want to make sure that you've demonstrated that you do have those skills and you do have that experience. I know sometimes as a recent grad, we're hoping, for a lot of training and having those kinds of opportunities, but the fact is, with as competitive as the market is today, it really is important to show how you can really start the ground day one, fast and furious, and just surpassing all of their expectations. The other thing they're going to look for is, are you really committed to this organization? Do you have the drive, and are you motivated to do well? Commitment is really important. If you're feeling kind of wishy-washy that, well, I'm looking at this job and this job, I'm not really sure, they really want to hear that this is your #1 choice. And hopefully it is. You might need to fake it a little bit if you don't know everything there is to know about, but really, hopefully you're only interviewing for places that you really are committed to and you're excited to be a part of it. So again, that goes back to what I've talked about in the job search process, is the research is so important, and it's not applying to everything. It's really applying to places where you're interested, where you feel like you have similar values and goals, so that you can convey that in an authentic way and not feel like you're faking it. So really showing that commitment to them is very key. So how do we make sure that we do that? Well, preparation is the key. And I think I mentioned earlier that you can actually start preparing now, whether you have an interview on the horizon or not. And we'll talk about some strategies to start doing that. And there's 3 main components to the preparation of an interview: your mental, your physical, and your emotional. Let me tell you a little bit what I mean by that. So mental. Do you know yourself? Courtney took us through that exercise of really understanding yourself, your values, your interests, your goals, and how you can articulate those. So again, if you've done that preparation, you can articulate your journey. That's really important. Are you organized about it as well and can speak to it in an organized way? Have you prepared stories about your experience? I'm going to give you a tool towards the end of this session to help you organize those stories and outline them so that they can be memorable for you, and you don't have to memorize them so much because they're your own personal stories. And have you done enough research by talking to people at the organization, by doing your own research, to make sure that you are a good fit and they're a good fit for you, so that you can articulate that at the beginning and throughout the entire interview. Physical. Okay, we need to make sure that we're not out until 2 in the morning the night before the interview. We need to be very well rested. I know sometimes it's hard to rest when you're nervous about an interview, but make sure at least you force yourself to have a nice relaxing evening, whether it's, a bath or visiting with friends, so it makes sure that you're well rested. Groomed for the organization. Now, every organization is a little different about what their expectations are in terms of grooming, so make sure, again, that you know your organization and that you are groomed and dressed in a way that is appropriate for them. You don't want to, if it's a accounting firm, you need to make sure that you're in your suit. If you're in a tech firm, don't show up in a suit, because they're going to wonder, really? Do you really know what our organization is like? So again, I think I mentioned earlier too, if you have the opportunity to visit an organization, to do an informational interview, get a sense of how people are groomed, again, one step up is always the best. And nothing that's going to distract, because again, the focus should be on you and your stories, not on your facial hair, how you're groomed, what you're wearing. So be very thoughtful about that. And then the nonverbal language is very key, making sure you have that firm handshake, no fishy hands, no fishy hands. So really if we were in the in-person job search group, I'd be having you all practice your handshakes so that that you would actually know. Make sure that you know that it's not a weak handshake. So make sure that that is really strong and that you feel confident about that. Smile, smile, smile. When in doubt, smile. 75% of your muscles in your face, they say, actually relax. So it's going to not only help you relax physically, but you're going to look more relaxed on the outside when you're having one of those interviews. So especially if you're having trouble coming up with an answer, you know, smile. It just kind of warms up the room. You know, these hiring managers want you to do well, and I think that's a really important thing to remember. So they're going to be smiling too. They want everyone to do their very best in this scenario. Eye contact is important, especially when they're talking to you. When you're talking to them, you don't necessarily want to be staring them down. And so I always want people to think about how much eye contact is about the right amount. And so, again, if we were live, I'd have you all kind of guess. But generally, if you're giving them eye contact about 75% of the time, that will feel like you're engaged, but not staring them down. So those are some things to think about. And I don't want you to overanalyze that. I just want you to know that eye contact is important, but you don't have to keep it at 100%. And posture. You don't want to be hanging back in your chair with your, your legs casually crossed or leaning in the chair. I typically recommend that if you keep both of your feet planted on the ground, and sit up straight with maybe 3 inches between your back and your chair, you're going to be leaning forward, you're going to be looking engaged, and that's just another physical element to keep in mind. One thing I notice some people when they get nervous is if you're a pen clicker or you're a pencil flicker, be aware of that. Be aware of kind of what your physical issues when you get nervous. We all get nervous, so it's just knowing what yours are. Sometimes people bounce their leg a lot. So try to keep your foot flat. Again, if you are a pen clicker, do not bring one of those pens in. If you're a pencil flicker, be careful not to have those. I'm someone that gets really red when I'm nervous, so especially on my chest. So I'll make sure that I have a shirt that goes up to my neck so I don't have to worry about turning red. Not that it's a bad thing to turn red. My mom always said, that's okay, Linda, that you turn red. It shows a little bit of humility. So so just know what it is. My other issue is I can get sweaty palms. I don't know if you have that problem, but I can get sweaty palms when I get nervous, and so before I shake hands, I make sure I do a nice little wipe along my pant leg. Again, and I tend to wear dark clothes because if I'm worried about any kind of sweat showing, just make sure, again, you know your issues. So now I've done full disclosure on what my issues are, but we all have them. It doesn't matter, and you will have them for your whole life. It's just, again, doing that preparation of knowing what kind of your nervous habits are and being prepared for them will help you overcome that. And if you're very focused on being prepared mentally and physically, emotionally, you'll be ready. You'll have that confidence going in there. You'll say, okay, I've got my stories, I visited the site, I know how to get there. That's another thing that's important in terms of the physical. If you're not familiar with the area, make sure you've done a dry run the day before. Portland traffic, if you're in Portland, is crazy now. I've lived here my whole life, and I've never seen traffic like this. And so right now, whatever meeting I go to, I'm trying to allow more time. I'm not great at that. But again, especially for interviews, you want to make sure that you are allowing enough time because that will give you that confidence. You don't really want to show up too early. We'll get to that in a little bit. But again, the emotional thing is it's going to help you build confidence. It'll help control your anxiety. It's okay to feel anxious. It really just shows that you care. That's what I always like to tell people. Being nervous, that just gets your adrenaline going, and you care, and it's okay. And they understand that you're feeling that way, and they're going to look for ways to make you feel a little bit better. So those 3 things are important for your preparation. Because then there is the process. So what do you expect? Now, some of you have probably been through an interview process before, but for those of you that haven't, I just want to outline this a little bit for you so you have a good sense of what is expected, so nothing is too much of a surprise. So again, you want to arrive early, but not necessarily too early. Maybe 10 minutes beforehand, and again, it depends on the space. Sometimes places don't have large places to hang out. But 10 minutes is really a good time to arrive. I encourage you to, if they have any kind of material that's about their company that's in the lobby, take it, the opportunity to read that. It might be one of those nice kind of icebreakers as you're walking back to the interview room to say, hey, I was just reading this in your annual report, all that. Again, you're just demonstrating that you care, that you're invested in the process, that you're invested in the organization, and you're always trying to learn more. Clarify the time once you do sit down. A lot of times, maybe they said it was 30 minutes and then it's going to change. So just say, I'm really excited to have this conversation. I just want to clarify, the time that you're expecting, and just it's showing that you're trying to be prepared and answer the questions appropriately. You want to be engaged with them. Again, noticing things, mirroring some of the things that they're saying, that they're looking, being in conversation with them, continually looking for ways to mirror what they're saying so that you have a sense of what that is. You want to close with a summary at each of your answers. So not only just the summary at the end of the interview, but also at the end of each one of your questions. So the summary, the main summary that I'm talking about here is you want to, again, re-engage on the actual interview that you're having with them. So reminding them what you like about the organization, what value you think that you can bring to the organization, and how you're looking forward to getting started, if in fact that is the case. I mean, I suppose you can be in an interview and unfortunately you find out some information and it's not a good fit, so then I suppose you would not necessarily say all of that. But given that it's a good experience for you, you just want to close and reiterate that you're really interested in working for the organization. It's amazing how many people don't take the effort to say that, and that becomes a signal to the organization that maybe you're looking at lots of different options and you're not as interested. And if you want to be the one in the driver's seat, you need to make sure you let them know that you are really interested in working for the organization. And then, of course, write a thank you note. I think I've said this before. Very few people write thank you notes. Again, it depends on the organization, whether it's an email thank you or a handwritten thank you. I'm a little old-fashioned, and so I think sometimes the handwritten thank you is the best because so few people do it. I think I've told you that only 5% of the population does it. It's a nice way to stand out. It tends to stay on people's desks. But again, for the immediacy, you might want to send an email just to make sure that they get that right away. So that's kind of what you can expect for the process. Again, towards the end, you're going to want to ask some clarifying questions about when you can hear from them, when you can follow up, all of that, because you really do want to respect their process, even though you may be feeling anxious and excited about getting started. They do have a process, and some organizations, especially the larger the organization, takes much longer than a smaller organization. Okay, so what do we want to do in terms of preparation? So, stories by the numbers. As you can see, there's lots of numbers here. So in terms of preparation, you want to think about things that you're really proud of, things that you've accomplished in your lifetime. 75% of your answers should pretty much be experience related, but some of them might be more life experiences. Maybe your parents were working abroad for 2 years in Amsterdam, and you had that experience of going to school at an international school, and maybe how that affected you and how that made you a more globally aware person. But think about the 5 to 7 things, and by just looking at your resume, and I've looked at a lot of resumes in this group, you guys have done amazing things and you've accomplished great things. So look through some of those and outline what are you most proud of? What are your 5 to 7 accomplishments that, again, are most relevant to that organization? And then list those out. Then look at your 4 to 5 strengths. Sometimes there's an overlap here, but you will have seen in the documents that we've provided the action verb list. Sometimes that can give you a clue to what your strengths, how to identify them, whether it's one of your hugest strengths is that you're amazing at organization, or you're a great designer, or something like that. So look at what you think your 4 to 5 greatest strengths are. We can't be great at everything. And again, those are hopefully most relevant to that organization. And maybe identify, a couple of stories that relate to those strengths. Again, those could be similar to the accomplishments. And you may have an experience where you have multiple stories from one experience, and that is okay. I had a significant experience when I was at U of O, and I was president of an organization, and I ended up using so many stories from that one experience, because even back in 1980, 88 and 89, my supervisor was teaching me how to do this method that I'm going to teach you today. So it's okay if you've had a significant leadership experience or a significant job to draw multiple experiences from that. Just make sure that you're showcasing something different about the skill that you created from that. And in the end, you want to have about 10 to 15 total stories. And I guarantee you, it's way easier to have 10 to 15 total stories than to know the answer to 100 questions. So even though that 10 to 15 sounds overwhelming, it's way easier than knowing how to answer the other questions. So please keep that in mind. It's not as awful as it might sound. And these are things that you can start doing now, whether you have an interview ready for you or not. You can start doing this. And this is also a good thing to, run by friends and family, people that know you really well. Even if you have good relationships with former supervisors, they might say, is there something, do you remember me doing something that you really liked or that impressed you? I'm trying to prepare for this interview. It's amazing how we kind of forget all the things that we've done. We don't want to. One of the things that I hear when I work with you, well, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging. And there are ways to convey that where you can say, I had this amazing opportunity to do this. And that can really help. So again, and then the last thing to remember is the answer should not be more than 2 minutes. Now what I noticed, two things, and I give you this time frame, and 1 to 2 minutes is probably a more fair answer. But what I noticed is that sometimes people can either give a super short answer with very few specifics that last maybe 30 seconds, or they kind of go on and on, because what happens for a lot of us in interviews is we get nervous, and we get nervous in the silence, so then we feel like we need to keep talking. But again, I'm going to give you a method of beginning, a middle, and an end, so that if you know that you're telling a complete story, they can ask you follow-up questions. You just want to give them enough detail that they want to ask you a little bit more about it. So again, if you prepare these stories, and then I actually recommend timing yourself, because it's amazing how you have no idea how long it actually takes. So that will kind of give you, then you'll at least feel like you have a rhythm when you're in the midst of it, so that you know exactly, okay, I'm doing this well, or I'm being too short, maybe I should add a little nuance to it. Okay, so how do we do it? So, so this is where I think, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to outline something before we get to our recruiter. But there's something called the Soraa Method. Maybe you've heard it called the STAR method. So Soraa stands for situation, obstacle, or I like to say opportunity because it's more positive, action that you took, and the result. And we actually have sheets. I hand out sheets where you can put up to 4, 2 on each side. So if you have a double-sided sheet, and actually just kind of keep this in a file or a folder, and it actually allows you to outline what those accomplishments are. So again, your situation, the opportunity, the action that you took, and the result. So the situation is something like, I planned an event. The opportunity was to raise, $40,000. The action I took is maybe you want to sell that you organized a team of 10, and then what the result was. Sometimes people start with the result. You don't have to talk through the Soraa method by situation, opportunity, action, result. It kind of, sometimes starting with the result has a stronger impact. But this, again, will give you enough detail so people will understand what you've been able to achieve. And when you convey this Soraa method, the other piece that I think provides incredible value, and I've gotten good feedback on this as well, is if you can tell your story and then relate it to something that you saw in the job description, or relate it to something that they've said in the interview. I was on this search committee for a development officer here at the University of Oregon, and there was a woman interviewing for the position. She hadn't worked in higher ed yet. She'd worked in hospitals as a fundraiser. And she would tell us, we'd ask her examples of how she went about raising money or how she cultivated relationships. And she would tell stories, and then she would tell kind of her beginning, middle, end to her story. And then she would say, and how I would see this working here at the University of Oregon is this. it was such a powerful way for me to see, okay, she really understands our organization. She sees how this is a very transferable skill set, and I didn't have to do the work to kind of, you know, draw the two lines together. So if you know the organization well enough, and you can tell your story and connect it to something that you've seen in the job description, or something that you've read online, or something that you learned in an informational interview, especially if you've maybe met with someone at the organization, and you can, you know, say that, Joyce Bloom told me that this was something that's similar to what she had done. That is very powerful to an organization. So again, but that takes a lot of preparation. The other things to always focus on is they're always going to start with tell me about yourself, and I know most of you are all groaning when you see that, but tell me about yourself is critical as well. And it doesn't mean tell your whole life story. Maybe identify 3 things that you think are most relevant. So some experience that you have, maybe start off by saying, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to share my experiences related to when I was, you know, president of this organization and intern at this organization, that I think where I, you know, gained some communication skills and design skills that I think will be beneficial to your organization. Again, it doesn't have to be long, but you want to make it relevant to what they're doing. They don't want to know about how many pets you have or how many different cities you've lived in. So really make it relevant to them, and show your enthusiasm for the interview. And then towards the end, they're going to say, why should we hire you? And again, this is a nuance to tell me about yourself. So how are you going to go about telling them that? So you can now infuse some of the things that you use from Tell Me About Yourself with some of the things that you learned in the interview, and then, again, make that case for them why they should hire you. And then, finally, you should have some questions for the interviewer. And questions for the interviewer can be anything related to their personal experience working at the organization, to things that you've read about online, but make it very specific to the organization and have at least 3 to 5 of those listed. You can actually bring those in with you. Maybe things have come up during the interview. Maybe they've answered some of those questions that you brought, which is why you want to have a few of those. And then as you're wrapping it up, another awkward spot that I know happens for a lot of people is when they say, so do you have any other questions for us? And then you kind of say, nope. Oh, well, that's kind of awkward. So I would just go right into, this has been a great, conversation. I really enjoyed learning more about your organization, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Just don't even go into the nope, because there's always more. Just kind of go with your enthusiasm if you can't think of anything else, because sometimes just we're nervous and we can't think of anything more and we're kind of overwhelmed. Just go into that close and find out what the next steps are, and again, expressing your enthusiasm. So I just want to give you 2 minutes to take a couple of notes, and then I'm going to introduce you to our next speaker. So again, if you could just outline, so you see that SOAR, I just want you to take a couple of notes so that you can go through that, and maybe you might have some questions in the Q&A or maybe in the LinkedIn group, but I'm going to give you about a minute. I know that's not long, and think about one of your accomplishments or one of your strengths, and I want you to go ahead and outline that, and then I'm going to introduce our next speaker. So we're going to be silent here for about 1 minute. All right? All right, go for it. Okay, well, I know that wasn't enough time, but hopefully got you thinking a little bit by just having that quiet moment to think about what would be something that I could write about. And again, ask us some questions in the Q&A or in LinkedIn, and hopefully we can help clarify that. And you will be getting additional handouts kind of outlining that a little bit more for you. So next, it is my pleasure. Allison Vanel is a 2011 graduate from the University of Oregon. And she actually was in our job, one of our job search groups when she first graduated. And since that time, she has had 3 positions as a recruiter. One at a staffing firm, one at a healthcare clinic, and now she's at Nike doing talent acquisition. And I thought it would be great for all of you to hear a perspective from someone that graduated just a few years ago, has been a recruiter for a few years now, and just find out a little bit about her perspective. So she's going to share with you some of the things that she thinks would be good for you all to know, and then you will have a little bit of time at the end to do a little bit of Q&A. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing this, and we're going to turn it over to Allison.
Great. Thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. I just want to talk about things from a recruiter perspective. Most companies actually utilize recruiters now. We're kind of like the gatekeeper to not only positions, but also to the company. So I thought it'd be helpful to share things from my point of view. So I've been a recruiter with Nike for about a year now, actually supporting Nike technology. So I previously came into the position and I had no technology experience. I was recruiting primarily healthcare previously. So coming into it, I actually didn't have the experience. So one of the topics that I want to touch on is actually if you are recruiting or you're interviewing for a position and you actually don't have the experience for it. So overall, you will want to look and see if you are the right fit for the position. So when it comes to it, you might want to be conscious about applying for positions. Within the recruiter portal, we have a database, and it actually tells us how many positions people have applied to within the organization. So we can actually see when people have applied to hundreds of positions. And that may not always be a good sign to the recruiter. It seems like you just want to get your foot in the door in any position, and once you have your foot in the door, it may not actually be the position that you actually want. So within 6 months to a year, you could start applying for other positions. So just be aware of that. Most companies do have that sort of database. Also, you want to make sure that when you are applying for positions, you really have a clear understanding of the role. We do find that a lot of people don't review the job descriptions, and I do find it really beneficial for you to maybe even create stories or examples, like Linda touched on, for each of the key points for the qualifications. So that's kind of one topic that I want to touch on. Another is providing examples. Linda definitely did a really great job of talking about stories. You definitely want to create a picture for especially the recruiter. I think that's really helpful. And if you don't have the answer, this is another topic that I wanted to touch on. If you don't have the answer to a question, what you do in this sort of case. So what you should do is, especially if you are confused by the question, I would definitely ask clarifying questions. So if it could be anything. Like for an example, I actually didn't have technical experience coming in and started recruiting for Nike technology. I was previously recruiting for healthcare. So I kind of provided them with an example of the things that I was doing, how many candidates I was interviewing a day, what steps I was doing in the process, how I was reviewing resumes, what our database looks like, anything of that sort, so that it created a picture for my previous manager to really understand my experience. I would say don't fake answers. If you don't have the answer, I would say don't make something up. Recruiters at this point have a really good understanding of when you are telling the truth or when you aren't. We kind of have this special ability to read people, I like to say. So don't make up an answer. And if you don't have the answer to the question, I would say, I actually have not been in this sort of case, but if this situation were to arise, this is what I would do in that instance. Another thing is you want to be personable. So clear communication, you want to be friendly, personable. You want to smile a lot. Most recruiters, if the conversation feels like it's not becoming an interview, but it's becoming a conversation, I would say that's always a really good sign. Recruiters will, if it's a good recruiter, they actually may not think that you're a good fit for the position that you're interviewing for, but in that case, they will actually recommend you for other positions, and as you gain more experience down the road in roles, then actually you could be a good fit for something in the future, or that recruiter could go on to work for an even bigger company, and if you're a recruiter with them in the past, then they may actually remember you. Another thing is communication with interviewers between interviews. So the point when you apply to a position, they pre-screen you, you have a phone interview and a panel interview, what that communication would look like amongst the recruiter. A lot of times recruiters are bombarded with candidate emails, and as much as it is our job to answer those questions, we also want to push you along in the process. We're having lots of communication with hiring managers, doing reference checks, background screenings, making offers. There's a lot of other things going on behind the scenes. So you don't want to come off as somewhat of a pest to the recruiter. So I would say if you haven't heard from a recruiter in about a week, just sending a friendly note, just saying, I just wanted to touch base. I'm still very interested in this position. It's still something that I'm keeping on my radar. Just wanted to keep you, just wanted to see if I was still on yours, sort of thing. Not even really needing to ask a question, but just sending a note, just so they can remember, oh yeah, that's right, I really need to talk to this hiring manager about this person. So the overall, the recruiters, they do want to be your advocate. They want to be the person that gets you in the door. If we feel that you are a great fit for the organization specifically, we want to be that person to help you get your foot in. So even connecting with them on LinkedIn, even after if you get the job or even if you don't get the job, recruiters still will continue to post positions on their LinkedIn. So that's a great way to keep yourself updated. So that's really the subjects that I want to touch on. Any sort of questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Great. Well, we have quite a few questions on this Q&A. We're having a little bit of an echo, Courtney. Can you hear that?
Is that me?
Well, it's just because there's 3, I think.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take these off here.
Okay. So I'm just going to start with them, and then Allison, how about if you and I kind of tag team them? How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. And then Courtney, if you can help us just keep scrolling them if I get distracted and forget to do that. Okay, so the first question is, I have questions about leadership and innovation. On the innovation side, does my own personal website give me the advantage to recruiting? I am working on making a website that tells my story and information. Does a physical product go a long way? Okay, so Clint, I believe you're a GIS graduate, so it kind of depends on if that's what your industry wants in terms of, mostly you see portfolios in creative industries. I haven't seen it as much with GIS folks. So I would actually talk to some of those. I know that I've set you up with an informational interview with somebody and see if he thinks that that's a beneficial opportunity to have a portfolio. In terms of the last part of your physical product, even people, because I know there are some people that have a field where it is necessary to have a portfolio, I recommend some sort of a leave behind if you want to do that, because sometimes they can't, when they're interviewing you, they don't have the opportunity to look at a portfolio. So having like a one sheet of 3 images of some of the work that you're most proud of is a good thing to bring along. And then I'm just going to include his second question because it's similar to it. How do you make a good portfolio if asked for one? What medium would you use? Again, that depends on each person's industry, so that's why the informational interview of people that are in your industry and say, which system can I use something as simple as WordPress, or do I use Square One? There's so many different platforms out there, and it also depends on if you want to spend money or not. So again, I think it's important, since we have so much variety in this group, that ask the people in your field what they like to see, and I think that's a much more efficient way to start. Allison, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that find someone that you can network with and actually maybe look at their portfolio and see what they've used. I would say that would be really helpful. Most recruiters are just going to look at our resume unless it's required for the position. So I would say definitely do some networking.
Good. And I'm just going to mute myself and see if Courtney has anything else she wants to add.
I forget that I have to unmute myself to talk. No, I thought what you all said was great. Perfect.
All right, I'm putting microphone back on. So Michael has asked, have any general interview tips for people who become flustered and have a hard time thinking on their feet when pressured? I think that is common for most people. I think that's where the preparation can help with being flustered. So the more that you prepare, the better. But also I think, to Allison's point, if you do get to a point where maybe you don't know the answer, give yourself a minute, take a deep breath, either say, you know, I just haven't had that experience, but I might approach it this way. But again, if they know that you're going to get flustered, so, but just try to take a deep breath, smile. I always think it's good to smile when you're nervous at that point. It'll make them smile and kind of release some of the tension for yourself and for the other person. Allison, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say just when it comes to preparation, it would probably be best just to Google maybe behavioral questions or situational questions to kind of relieve maybe the pressure that you feel of coming up with examples or of a story. And even writing down, you know, what is your most challenging situation that you've been in, a difficult time, or you know, maybe customers that were really difficult when it comes to some positions. Just really understanding how to answer every question when it comes to situational. I think that's really helpful.
Okay, I'm going to now mute myself and see if Courtney has anything else to add.
Yeah, I think preparation is key. The other thing that I would say is practice interviews. They help me a ton just to get in that situation, because believe it or not, you will get just as nervous and scared in a practice interview as you will a real interview. And so it's good to kind of just get yourself at least in check with what those feelings are going to be like, so that when you do get in the situation, it's a little less nerve-wracking, hopefully. So lots of practice.
And just to add to what Courtney said, if any of you are either in Eugene or Portland, you can set up those appointments with us. Or the other thing that you can do is you can do a Skype appointment. I mean, I've done Skype where I will ask people questions. So again, just to reiterate what Courtney said, practice is great, and we're here to help you with that practice if you don't have somebody, you know, that you can do that with. Okay, looking at the next question. If you don't get the job, is it appropriate to contact recruiters to ask how you did and where you can improve? Beth, I think that is such a great question. Sometimes they won't tell you, but I think if you can do it in a really positive way, say, I understand I didn't get the position, and but I was so excited to do it, and I really want to learn. I'm going to be interviewing again, and if you're willing to share with me anything that you might be willing to share, I would benefit from that so much, because I can't tell you how many people stayed in contact with that person, and then maybe the person that they hired fell through. And if you leave that nice, positive, lasting relationship with them, you know, I know people that were second choice and then they got picked because the first one didn't work out after 3 months or something. So I always think it's great to ask, but I'm sure Allison can speak to sometimes you might not be able to say much, or you might not be able to have the time. Thoughts on that, Allison?
Yeah, I would say typically when it comes down to someone not getting the position, it's usually just because they found someone that was probably a little bit more qualified or had a little bit more related experience. But I think it would be great to call the recruiter and then continue to build that relationship with them.
Yeah, good. And then Courtney, I'm going to switch it to you. I'm going to turn my mute off.
I think you all covered it beautifully. Yeah.
Okay, next question. How old can our stories be? I feel like I have some good ones from when I was younger that are relevant, but will it be looked down upon because I was so young? Again, that's without knowing the specific story. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's bad. I mean, if you think it's very relevant, they just can't all be young. Maybe it's something like, you know, I first realized that I had this very creative side to me when I was in 4th grade and went to this art camp and was recognized for some. I mean, maybe it's part of your story of, you know, you have followed this path and you started to notice some of these achievements early on, and now you're having the opportunity to use them. I'll just tell this, you're going to think it's silly, but I just had my 3rd-year high school reunion this last weekend, And one of the people I hadn't seen in forever, he went to school at Stanford. And I said, so what are you doing now? And he says, I'm doing what I did in high school. He says, I'm building sets for New York plays. So again, it was something that he just had fun doing when he was in high school, and he's still doing it 30 years later. So a lot of these experiences that we've had when we're really young, they could end up being your career 30 years later. So that's what I would say to that. Anything from you, Allison?
No, I think that's great. I would say that, especially when it comes to, because you're a recent grad, anything from high school, college, I mean, even before that is going to be relevant.
And I think I said earlier, when you're talking about some of those early experiences, the example I use is possibly your family was abroad for a few years. Those are huge shaping experiences. So, and so many companies want to see a globally minded candidate. So there might be something even younger than high school, but it kind of shaped who you are and how you see the world. So don't be afraid to use those experiences. They just can't all be in one pot. Courtney, do you have anything more to add to that?
I think what you all said was great. The one thing I would say, I actually just interviewed someone this morning, and they were talking about an experience, and she was referencing middle school as the experience, and what I found my brain doing is, just because she said the words middle school, I was kind of discounting that experience in my head. And so even though the experience was fantastic and it was very relevant, so even if you can just reframe how you say it rather than starting with, when I was 7 or, in middle school, I don't know, maybe you had excellent experiences when you were 7 years old. Just reframing it so that you're not kind of putting the experience down, because if you're confident in it and you're selling how relevant it is, then I think that comes across on our end as well.
That's good, and that reminds me, I didn't touch on it very much, but one of the things that I catch people saying a lot that I always want to bring them back and say, oh, don't say that, is when you're not feeling confident and you use the word just when you're about to tell a story. So try that word just. It's amazing how it just takes away everything positive about what you're going to say. So try to get rid of that word in most of your language when you're looking for a job. I mean, I like people to get rid of it in life. I feel like I say that to my women friends. I'm like, quit saying just. It's all good. So so give yourself that confidence. And I like what Courtney said too, because I do think, if you just, I had an experience in my past, maybe that would have been better than saying middle school, which was sounds like was kind of Courtney's trigger there. So, okay, next question. Should we convey sole commitment to an organization that we have an informational interview with? Well, I guess it kind of depends. I mean, you can talk about being really interested in this organization and why you're interested in. If they are your sole commitment, I guess you could say that. But I think people are kind of realistic about that. You want to show your enthusiasm, but realistically, if you take a step back and think about being committed to something, well, my guess is there's probably at least top 5 that you would be happy in being committed to. So I just don't think you need to kind of go all out. But I could be wrong, because I know Allison might say Nike wants to hear that you're all in and not competing with anybody else. So thoughts on that, Allison?
So I would think, sorry, I get distracted if there's an echo. I would say that if you want to work for a big company like Nike, you should probably know why you want to work for a big company. And maybe you could even emphasize, I want to work for a big company because it allows me to meet lots of people, network within the organization. There's lots of different areas to grow within. But if you want to work for a small company, understand why you want to work for a small company. And I think we're pretty realistic that we understand that, we're not the only, when it comes to sports companies, we're not the only company. So maybe understanding why you want to work for a sports company. I think those are probably better ways to look at it instead of saying, like, I want to work for only Nike because of this. It's more like, I want to work for a big company that also is involved with sports apparel, and this is why.
Good. And Courtney, do you have anything to add to that?
That was great. No, great.
Okay. We have one more question up here on Q&A, and we have about 7 minutes left. So if you're thinking of some other questions, that you'd like to ask us, we have a little bit more time for you, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Beth. Do you have preparation tips for introverts? Great question. You know, the one thing that I love about introverts is that I think they're best in that one-on-one situation. I think probably it's challenging for introverts in a panel situation where people might be kind of competing for time, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But an introvert, the thing that I love about introverts is that they're such good listeners. And they really can understand a question deeper than someone like myself who's an extrovert that's just trying to think about what am I going to say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say. So I would just encourage you that I think, you know, introverts in general are really great one-on-one, and that you'll probably do fantastic. Again, just like everybody else, as long as you're prepared. I think the challenge does come in those panel interviews where you might have some strong personalities and you're having to exert yourself in an extroverted way that might not feel as authentic to you. I think you just have to know that those recruiters are aware of that. And if it's not a job where you have to have extroverts to be successful, which I don't think, you know, everyone needs all types, and it depends on what you're applying for. But feel confident in answering questions clearly. I notice that sometimes people that don't speak the most, when they do speak, people tend to listen more. So you might find that that those people that are competing can be kind of the annoying ones on the panel, and probably when you have the opportunity to answer your question, they'll be listening more. And typically, I have noticed that introverts tend to be even more thoughtful in their answers. That's been my experience working with introverts. Other thoughts?
I would think it's what I always do in preparation for interviews is I always prepare with someone that has been in the workforce a little bit longer than me, and it's just more of a one-on-one. Actually, my old manager, she worked for Nike, and so I had a one-on-one and just kind of talked to her about different scenarios, different examples. And having that one-on-one setting with someone that was close, like a mentor or a friend preparing for interviews, I thought was really helpful. You could probably even go to family members. But I think someone that has been in the workforce longer, I think is really helpful, or maybe understands your position, so a mentor is always good. But I think if you can prepare one-on-one with someone and they can even ask sample interview questions, I think that would be really helpful.
Are you coming to me? Beth, as a fellow introvert, I feel you. I would say for me the biggest thing is that I get exhausted really easily in an interview session. After interviews, I'm like ready to pass out for a few hours, and so one thing is that I do allow myself that time after the interview. I say like no contact with the outside world for a few hours afterwards, and then I kind of know I can look forward to that. Also, don't be afraid to ask for breaks, especially if it's like a day-long interview, bathroom breaks or something. You know, can I just take a few minutes to walk around the building? You can always kind of frame it in a really positive way, like I'd love to just look around, or I need to go grab the restroom really quickly. Also, taking notes during the interview has been really helpful for me. So specifically when I'm in kind of the Q&A part with them, when I'm able to ask questions, I always let them know. I kind of make a joke out of it, like, oh, I'm a big note taker, and then I can be writing while we're doing that Q&A. And again, you have to still give them eye contact and still be engaged, but it lets me kind of check out for a little bit to restore my energy during that time. So my biggest advice would be just find ways that you can kind of re-catch or re-instill your energy throughout the day, and then also just be honest with yourself and know that it's going to be exhausting and that you'll reward yourself afterwards.
Oh, that's great. It's always good to hear that advice straight from an introvert. Okay, Linda has a question. For a job that doesn't list qualifications, but rather preferred competencies and lists license and credentials, how do you determine if you qualify? Because it's preferred, so it's not saying required. I guess I would call it, I mean, if it's really kind of that loosey-goosey and not that specific, I would call and see if there's someone that you can talk to. I know sometimes people worry about making those contacts, but if there's any way that you can call someone within the organization or someone that has the job that you like maybe in a different organization and get clarification on what those expectations are. That seems kind of a little vague and wishy-washy, so I'm sure it does feel confusing to you. So I would try to see if you can talk to somebody and say, this is my background, this is what they're asking for, do you think this is going to be a good fit? Since we have 3 minutes left and more questions, I'm going to keep going through these, and then I'll circle back to Allison and Courtney and see if they want to add anything else. There's a job that lists bachelor's and a mix of experience with working with students, but it also lists a pupil personnel services credential, which requires an MA. I find it confusing if I qualify. You know, Linda, those are such good questions, and they're really technical. So maybe you can connect with your advisor offline, and then we can answer that more specifically. Maybe look at the job description, compare it to your resume, just so that we can answer that in a more thoughtful way than probably a Q&A where we don't have all of the context. I hope that that's okay. So Michael said, if we apply to jobs outside of where we live and we end up getting an in-person interview, should we expect the company to pay to get us there? Not as a recent grad. I think you need to try to, unless they offer it, that's very rare, unless it's a big-time consulting firm or something like that. But for recent grads, you don't see that very often. So that's why I would try to clarify how soon do you need to get out there, that you need to book a ticket. Then maybe they say, oh, we'll pay for that. But be clear that you need to take some steps in order to get out there for the interview. Other people want to weigh in on that one?
I would say you could ask, oh, sorry, I jumped in.
Okay. Go ahead, Allison.
I would say you can even ask the recruiter in the pre-screen, because typically you're going to have that initial phone screen with them. And if there is any sort of, if you're unclear of that, I mean, you could even just say, you know, as we progress in the process, you know, what are going to be the next steps, and then they may even jump in and even say it for you. But I would agree with Linda. Typically for position right out of college, they wouldn't pay for it unless it was a very large company. But I know that even for a lot of our administration roles, we don't pay for them to fly out. We typically ask that they do that.
I was just going to add, I think, Michael, it's a fantastic question because it's a very awkward situation to be in when you don't really know if they're going to pay for you or not. After graduating with my master's, I was in that situation several times where it was like, oh, do I ask if they're going to pay for me or not? I would say there are tactful ways that you can do that, and you can say, you know, I'm not expecting anything, I'm just curious about how the process works, you know, should I be booking a ticket, or etc. And then Allison's right that sometimes they might lead with exactly what the process is. One thing I would just say is that if you are in a situation where they either offer to pay, or if they say, you know, if financial barriers are a problem for you, let us know. Just make sure you do a lot of self-reflection on if that position is going to be a good fit for you. I got into a situation where they had offered to pay, and I went ahead and accepted that, and afterwards I was like, oh, that was a bad move on my part, because I actually didn't want to work there, and I shouldn't have kind of accepted that their offer. So just think through it really well before you do get into that situation. If you want to ask them to cover anything financially, however they lay that out, just make sure you do a lot of self-assessment on if this position is really going to be a good fit for you or not, and if you want to make that commitment both on your end to pay or to kind of start the conversation with them. Awesome.